Okay, so Nutanix, you worked with was it Atlantic Ventures, I think, on the Improving Sustainability in Data Centers 2024 report. I suppose a good place to start would just be a little bit of background. Where did the idea come? Is it the latest in a series of them, or is it the first time you've done it? Just the background to it.
Yeah, so this is the second report we've done with Atlantic Ventures on the subject of sustainability in data centers. And it's an idea that principally came out of our team in France. And as you may know, France is typically on the cutting edge of things around sustainability. They're a lot more advanced in a lot of their regulations with what they have going on. And we see that feed through to questions we're asked from the customers there. And our team, I think, principally had two main reasons for wanting to do this piece of work with Atlantic Ventures. The first being is that over the last 15 years that Nutanix has been in business, we've seen lots and lots of our customers report back to us about the energy savings and the space savings they've had after replacing their old infrastructure with newer Nutanix HCI-based infrastructure. And then on top of that, the second reason was kind of that they felt frustrated that every time someone's talking about data center efficiency, it's all about the power, the cooling, the PUE and all that kind of stuff, the power usage effectiveness. And they didn't really look at the core platform, the whole reason the data center exists to support the compute and storage and networking that's in there. So on the basis of that, they engaged Atlantic Ventures, the analyst, a good few years ago now, to do the first report that came out in 2022. And so this version is the updated 2024 version.
Okay, and as you've I think alluded to there, it basically looks at it looks at a lot of things, but the impact. One of the main things is the impact of the hybrid cloud and hyperconverged infrastructure (HCI) on the data center in terms of the sustainability angle and also, I guess, cost savings operations. So just be good to, I guess, give us an overview of that, the connection, if you like, between those technologies and the benefits they bring, if you like.
Yeah, and I think it reflects the way the market's moving and the way other analysts see us. In fact, Gartner's retired the HCI quadrant, Magic Quadrant, since the last report was done, and they've now moved on to a distributed hybrid infrastructure Magic Quadrant. So Nutanix has had to move with that as well, or was already moving, actually. And I think what's interesting is that now we have a platform that can run the same infrastructure platform effectively across public, private clouds, different hardware vendors, AWS, Azure, OVH Cloud. There's a lot of opportunity there for organizations to reduce their on-prem data center footprint to just what they need to run in the long term, and then flex to cloud and use that as a shared infrastructure where they need to. So what Atlantic Ventures have done is they've gone into a little more detail around looking at a hybrid cloud scenario where an organization, for at least a proportion of its workloads, because this isn't always possible for everything, is able to use public cloud as a disaster recovery second site, and using a lot of the native technologies built into Nutanix. And that, of course, means because they're effectively renting infrastructure, should the worst occur on their primary site, customers spending a lot less money. They don't actually own that infrastructure. It can be used by other people. Well, they're not using it. And of course, the hyperscalers are famously always talking about how efficient their data centers are. So there's a potential saving just from that, as well as the fact that you're only temporarily using that infrastructure.
And I think the report suggests or recommends that there is a need for urgent action around this topic. I guess it'd be good to understand whether it's the report or yourself, your view on where we are now, if you like, where folks are, and what needs to be done to get people moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think the urgency, from a personal point of view, it comes from climate scientists and the ever amount of extreme weather events we're seeing. I've got colleagues in Florida on my team who've had a heck of a time in
Yes.
the last month. But what's interesting is that we're seeing a lot of this now. What's been a nice to have in the past really um, start to see the signs of it biting. There's new EU regulations, but particularly of data centers of a certain size. And the sooner you act, the sooner you see the benefits. And I think one of the things that's interesting about modernizing that core IT infrastructure in the data center is that if you're doing it just to reduce power consumption, you reduce your energy use and carbon emissions, that's only really part of the benefit. That the real benefit is the modernization of your infrastructure and what it allows you to do to progress your digital transformation. And that has, of course, a knock-on effect, because as you modernize your business, improve processes, those in effect can also improve the sustainability of your company. I think it's sometimes referred to as the handprint. If you've got a carbon footprint of all of the energy you're using in the data center and the embodied emissions associated with the hardware, this handprint concept is effectively pulling the carbon out of the sky. Because if you're doing things like improving logistics or removing paper processes or just improving the way people work in general, then there is that sustainability impact as well. And of course, it could be some kind of sustainability-based technology that's specifically there to track carbon emissions and help improve the performance of an organization.
And in terms of the urgency, I mean, it's no secret that AI is on the cusp, or is already sort of exploding, and I guess allied to that IoT, which has been talked about for a long time, but people are beginning to suggest that its time has finally arrived. So there's going to be those sort of double whammy, if you like. So just, I suppose, how important is it to focus on energy efficiency within the data center, and also the role that cloud operations have to play in this, I suppose, increasingly compute intensive environment, if that's the right way of characterizing it.
Yeah, and I think AI is really interesting in the way it's really exploded. And even the last 18 months are we talking about, since ChatGPT really woke everybody up to the possibilities. And I think there's a lot of responsibility comes with the AI side of things, not just on the compute and the energy use side of things and the consumption of resources, but of course on the ethical side, on the security side. But it reminds me a little bit of Bitcoin mining in a way, with everybody rushing out to go and procure new hardware for their new AI projects and get to work on whatever idea they've got. But I guess my concern is that not all of these projects are going to be successful. And even Gartner, I think, has got an article somewhere saying that they expect 30% of AI projects to fail. And if you're consuming resources from a monetary point of view to make those projects run, you also should think about what's happening sustainability wise. Like, you're buying a load of hardware, you're consuming a lot of energy. You're really sure that there's a benefit for society at large, as well as being able to sell your product or fulfill your idea. So it's quite an interesting point. And I think a lot of organizations in the next year are going to, where they've been successful, are then going to look at their carbon emissions reporting, and they're going to find out that they might not have really hit the targets that they might have expected to. And that might be the same, of course, for IoT. IoT, of course, generates a lot of data, has a lot of devices out as endpoints. I mean, I don't think it's going to hit in the same way as AI will. But I've recently installed Home Assistant, the home IoT device management system, if that's the right thing to call it. And I didn't realize how many endpoints I've got kicking around my house. And I bet that's only just got started. So yeah, the IoT could generate a lot of data and of course have a big footprint as well.
So in terms of some of the specifics on the report, there was some quite headline grabbing, and I'm not sure I can remember this, but in terms of the potential energy savings, I think there was some big numbers, and also the suggestion that over sort of not just locally but regionally or globally, that the numbers are potentially quite huge. So yeah,
Yeah, and of course it depends a lot on which region that you're operating in. And I think one of the first things that's important to understand is the concept of carbon intensity in an energy grid and how much it can fluctuate between different countries. Even the difference between, say, Poland and France can be up to 30 times. So the same data center running the same workload in France could be 30 times less in terms of its carbon emissions just from energy because of the energy grid. And I guess that goes back to the education piece, is something that I would promote as probably the most important thing for people to worry about at the moment. But yeah, the report has comes up with a figure based on their models of a 27.6 reduction if you can change your data center architecture for what we call legacy 3-tier. So that's old, separate storage, compute, networking as separate devices. They're then hooked up often over something called a fiber channel SAN in the data center. And replacing that with a HCI like model where everything is just done in commodity hardware, all the intelligence is built in software, and there's a lot of automation. They modeled out to see this 27-ish% reduction and a new for new comparison. And so I think that's another important point to bear in mind, especially as we see a lot of sustainability claims from different vendors or cloud providers. That this report is actually doing a model of new versus new. What if you had to build a greenfield data center tomorrow, and your choice was do legacy or new architectures? What we've seen when we talk to customers, of course, is when we've been replacing their legacy infrastructure, is that on top of that, they're replacing infrastructure that's usually at least 3 years old, often 5 years old. And if they've really let it rot, 7 or even 10 in some cases. And of course, replacing that old infrastructure that was made years ago probably isn't well maintained and managed, just in itself comes with a certain amount of improvement in its energy efficiency as technology's progressed. Whether that's going to continue due to Moore's law continuing, it remains to be seen. But yeah, the report itself was new versus new. So I guess the idea is that if people change their mindset and look at the data center infrastructure platform architecture and put aside the old way of thinking and embrace the newer technologies like HCI, then there's significant improvements can be made.
And the sort of double good news is that financially as well, there are attractive savings to it, because I mean, the pressure for sustainability means that companies are perhaps not as precious when it comes to whether it's costing them or not. But fundamentally, most organizations don't like to, shall we say, spend money on sustainability if they don't think they're going to get, if you like, some money back, some savings. So I say the good news is more sustainability also leads to some significant cost savings in this case. Yes.
Yeah, and that's definitely been helped. Maybe helped is the wrong word, by the energy crisis we experienced a couple of years ago. Maybe to some extent energy prices have settled a little, but I still think it's potentially quite a volatile market given world events. And I think people don't often, in the past, and I guess globally different, it varies by region, the cost of energy. In some places they haven't thought about it too much at all. But if you think a 500-watt server at about 23 pence, I think is what I'm paying at home for my energy per kilowatt hour. I think that works out at about £1,000 a year on energy. So if you're going to run that hardware for 5 years, you can see how a 27% reduction might might help you out.
And in terms of some of the specifics the report looked at, I think there was some interesting findings when it comes to the hyperconverged infrastructure, particularly in the cloud. So if you can perhaps talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean that was a term that Atlantic Ventures used to describe what Nutanix is doing with public cloud. Essentially, the public cloud providers, as probably everybody knows, they offer VMs or instances that are virtual instances. What they might not know is that they also offer bare metal services. So you can go into AWS or Azure and you can provision an actual hardware physical server, and there's no hypervisor in there. And what this allows Nutanix to do is run our hyperconverged HCI software on that bare metal and effectively set up a cloud within a cloud. And this has a number of benefits. It means that you can have a common operating model between the data center and on-prem. And it also means that should that public cloud end of your hybrid cloud need to expand quickly or retract quickly, you can do that in perhaps as little as an hour, even less in some circumstances. So it offers a lot of flexibility, which probably address a whole load of other business concerns. But in terms of sustainability, the scalability is very good if you've got a business that tends to fluctuate different times of year. I'm thinking retail and logistics that have a big pressure period starting very soon, and often need to plan their capacity months and months in advance. I think they can probably be a little more flexible and as a result consume less overall.
And I think disaster recovery efficiency, I think you mentioned it earlier on in the conversation, but just what did the report have to say about that?
Yeah, so disaster recovery is a particularly good use case for this hybrid cloud scalability report approach. Often, for at least the most critical applications, an organization is trying to maintain the availability of. They'll have a primary location and they'll have a secondary location that is an entire copy of the primary location. And with this approach, we're doing it with hybrid cloud. You can have the exact same operating model, the same underlying infrastructure, but you don't have to have all of the footprint day one ready to go. You can effectively scale it up on demand from nearly nothing. Should you have a DR event, should your primary site go down, should you need to do some testing or something like that. So if you think that you're effectively removing that secondary data center, that's a whole chunk that you don't need to power, you don't need to cool, you don't need to actually load the servers in. You effectively use the shared pool of infrastructure for those things. And Atlantic Ventures, I think in their methodology, they made an assumption that organizations weren't going to do this with every application. It could be reasons of data sovereignty. It could be data locality to other applications or things like that. But for a good chunk of applications, we think it's a really good use case. And of course, saves money as well when you don't have to buy a load of hardware up front and you can just rent it when you need it.
And maybe at this stage, I don't know, often confidentiality prevents, naming names, but are you able to share one or two examples maybe of how you have helped organizations with this hyper-converged infrastructure approach and any sort of feedback that they've given you or you in terms of what they've achieved?
Yeah, quite a few actually. There's lots of case studies on our website that people can look at. But in particular, we're working with an analyst at the moment we've had interview to validate what they're reporting about what they found. In both cases, they're making use of public cloud as well as on-prem and running our software in both locations. One's a big global G2K publishing company that when in their data center, they implemented Nutanix's core HCI. They reduced 68 racks of kit to 3. Sorry, that's 68 racks to 3 of Nutanix and 5 of the old stuff that they were just going to sweat, to be clear. And then they put the DR position for the most critical of those applications up into AWS. So instead of having 3 racks of Nutanix that they needed to mirror, they had 3 nodes running in AWS that then, should a disaster event occur in that primary data center, they can hit a button and within an hour or so, that 3 nodes is expanded out and they're able to bring the rest of their workloads up. So yeah, they've done quite an incredible thing there. And of course, as I said earlier, it depends on the age of their existing kit and how well maintained and managed it was. But that's a pretty incredible reduction, going from 68 to 8 racks. And then there's another good example, is a UK regional government body, Scottish Forestry and Land. They have actually had an interesting journey over the years, because they were a good few years ago, they moved from legacy infrastructure onto Nutanix, and then they took a strategic approach within their organization to move to Microsoft Azure, and Nutanix was able to help support that, because we can run our software on the bare metal nodes available in Azure. So they've then gone through that journey, and being a sort of land and forest green, if you might say, organization, they've done really well tracking those kind of metrics as they make that journey. And so the analyst was really, really almost thrilled, I think might be the word, about the work they've done there. So yeah, we're looking to that report to come out. But yeah, there's many of these case studies that mention people's space savings as well as energy savings available on the Nutanix website.
And maybe just finally a sort of 2-part question, I guess. So first of all, what sort of needs to happen for organizations to get switched on to hyperconverged infrastructure? And I suppose, put it the other way, what advice would you give to organizations that are aware that, if you like, their existing environment is far from perfect, and therefore what do they need to look at or look to do to start realizing some of the benefits that particularly you just outlined there?
Yeah, well, to answer the second part first, if we're specifically talking about sustainability benefits, I still think there's a big education piece that needs to happen. And I've been in my current role working largely on sustainability for the last 2 years, and I did not know what I didn't know. There are a lot of unknowns to me. And had I come across the Green Software Foundation, Green Software Practitioner training at the start of that, I'd have had a much more accelerated journey. The Green Software Foundation sounds like it's targeted at developers, but I would really encourage any IT professional, project manager, salesperson, infrastructure manager to go take a look at that course. It only takes about an hour and a half. I think it's very valuable and helps you level set so that you can properly understand some of the issues that we've only really touched on today. And then, of course, armed with that information, you might consider it as one of your focused requirements for a new infrastructure platform. And I think it's really important to understand how the Nutanix cloud platform, as we call it now, with its core HCI infrastructure, has progressed and evolved over the years. When we started out, it was a sort of appliance-based model. There was only specific hardware that you could run it with. And over the years, it's developed in terms of performance, in terms of scalability, and of course, the flexibility, being able to run on public cloud, now mean that there's virtually no application that it can't gobble up and take care of and run in a much more efficient way, we hope.
Okay, it's been brilliant to chat. We covered a lot of ground, and you give some fantastic insights into sustainability, hyperconverged infrastructure. So Matt, really appreciate the time you've given me. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Cheers, Matt. Thanks.